The ship arrived without a sound. No blaring alarms, no incoming messages, not even the usual ceremonial brass fanfare that typically welcomed returning warships, especially when they returned ahead of schedule. The Fong, a top-tier reconnaissance cruiser built for extended planetary monitoring and highly opinionated scans, simply rolled in like a latecomer trying to sneak into a movie without buying a ticket. Dockmaster Huval noticed first, mainly because the ship had parked diagonally across 4 docking bays, a move that violated not just interstellar protocol but basic manners. "Who in the stars is flying that crate?" he grumbled, adjusting his monocular. An accessory he wore purely for aesthetics, not function, since it gave him the appearance of someone important. Then the airlock hissed open, and everything spiraled. One figure emerged, alone. No crew, no officers, no ceremonial welcome. Just a single being, technically alien, unmistakably male, in that disarming way that makes you want to hand him a blanket and ask if he wants a snack. It was Sergeant Glenn Tockmail, last seen leading a dozen elite operatives on a classified mission to a planet so unremarkable it was catalogued only as Earth. A Class 7. One, a habitable sphere, best known for its greenhouse gases, competitive lawn grooming, and obsession with televised cake competitions. But now Glenn was back. No armor, no boots, wearing somehow denim shorts. His chest bore smudges of an ominous orange substance with a suspiciously cheesy aroma. It only got worse. Dr. Vundelax, lead behavioral analyst from the Institute of Cognitive Wobbliness, presented her report to a packed chamber. "We're observing signs of severe psychological trauma," she began. "His symptoms point to exposure to something profoundly illogical, possibly culturally recursive." "Culturally what now?" bellowed Admiral Grintz, who didn't grasp half of what she said but covered that gap with volume. "Picture a species," she explained, "that builds instruments from empty bottles, venerates rectangular chips made from potatoes, and voluntarily ferments fruit before injecting it into pickled vegetables, for fun." Silence followed. "Humans," she added, though no one needed clarification. Theories flooded in. Some were plausible: neurological shock, emotional overload, condiment-related poisoning. Others, not so much. One widely circulated theory, heavily promoted by Galactic Truthish, claimed Glenn had encountered a mythical Terran chaos being known only as Florida Man. This entity allegedly wielded bedlam like a club and once bit an alligator because it gave him a weird look. The theory was dismissed due to lack of hard evidence, and the fact that it made several senior analysts cry. Meanwhile, political pressure mounted. "If humans are a threat," thundered Chancellor Korb, "we must strike first." "Strike what?" shot back Ambassador Tilnix. "A duck and a pair of shorts?" "Exactly. Diplomatic relations with Earth, already fragile after an incident involving karaoke and a UN translator's off-key rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody, were officially frozen. Earth, naturally, remained blissfully unaware that an alien with a toy duck was the reason it had been blacklisted by interdimensional visitors. To add fuel to the cosmic confusion, a group of rogue academics formed Project Quacklight, dedicated to unlocking the duck's secrets. Was it a code? A tool? A signal? For weeks they stared at it, waiting. It squeaked once, and in turn collapsed. The duck, oblivious and indifferent, became a galactic icon. Songs were written, documentaries aired. A Keltrax's Prime fashion line dropped an entire Earthcore trauma aesthetic collection. Distressed jean shorts, 1,000-yard stares, and rubber duck pendants. And still, Glenn said nothing. He ate quietly. Occasionally, he hummed a strange, unsettling jingle that analysts suspected was from an extinct fast food ad circa 2037. Then came Vel Roeder, a linguist who took a radical approach. She presented him with a tray of peculiar Earth objects. A pizza slice, a soda bottle, a glittery cowboy hat, and a photo of a woman yelling at a cat. Glenn blinked. His eye twitched. Slowly, he reached out, took the glitter hat, and placed it gently on the duck. That was the closest anyone got to a breakthrough. Vel Roeder retired the next day. She moved to a barren moon and said she needed space. Back at the council, talks grew darker. "If he won't speak," muttered High Counselor Nendril, "perhaps we send someone else." Silence. Another mission. Another crew. Another duck. But curiosity is a ruthless force. It devours caution, digests fear, and eventually swallows logic whole. And someone, somewhere, was always willing to poke the incomprehensible, especially if there was hazard pay. Earth was still there, waiting. 3 weeks earlier, on the stubborn little planet still calling itself Earth, located exactly where it shouldn't be. A ship uncloaked above a region known locally as the Deep South. No one noticed, partly due to the cloaking tech, mostly because it was Sunday and a chili cook-off was in full swing. The ship landed silently, the kind of landing that makes other landings question their volume. Nestled into a patch of woods behind a field filled with humans grilling meat and arguing over sauce recipes, the craft remained hidden. Inside, Sergeant Glenn Tockmail stood tall, if slightly jittery. Around him, his 12-person recon team, Unit Vidian, waited. Elite, precise, trained in stealth, diplomacy, and non-lethal intel extraction. The best of the best. Prepared for anything. Mastering the ancient art of staying hidden behind potted plants, Unit Vidian had one mission: observe, record, extract. No contact, no conversation. Definitely no participation in what one analyst had grimly called flesh-based heat rituals. It was all going perfectly until it wasn't. Within 6 minutes, the mission collapsed spectacularly. Corporal Nibs, a linguistic prodigy and emotional wildcard, got too close to a grill and, fatal mistake, praised the barbecue rub. Instantly, he was absorbed into a local family unit, handed a foldable chair, and given a paper plate loaded with sizzling meat and unnaturally luminous corn. "Well, I'll be," shouted a sunburnt man sporting a beef is my spirit animal cap. "Y'all went all out on them alien costumes, huh?" Nibs tried to explain. A baked bean silenced him. The team's camouflage, intended to mimic natural surroundings, had malfunctioned. Instead of blending in, it now resembled a 1990s rave. Blinding neons, glitching patterns, and, on at least one operative, blinking LED smiley faces. To the locals, they looked like novelty entertainers. To themselves, they looked like a bad idea in motion. Glenn tried to regain control. He issued silent orders, triggered emergency extractions, and screamed internally in 6 languages. No one listened. Sergeant Janik was in a hot dog line. 2 scouts were tossing horseshoes with someone named Earl. The medic had somehow been roped into judging a pie contest. Extraction attempts only dug the team deeper. The humans were welcoming in that borderline aggressive way where refusing kindness felt like insulting their grandma. Cold beers were pushed into hands. Anecdotes were exchanged. A man named Carl slapped an operative's back so hard it activated their emergency medkit. They tried to leave, only to find their ship blocked by a lifted pickup truck painted with a flaming eagle uppercutting the moon. By sunset, Unit Vidian had splintered across 5 local events. Specialist Vor ended up in a garage-turned man cave watching a helmet-based sport. Technician Drex was stuck on a pontoon boat learning to fish with explosives. Private Zurl, physically the strongest, was last seen trying to explain gravitational lensing to a woman named Mandy who was either intoxicated, psychic, or both. She claimed she'd once seen aliens in a Waffle House and also thought Glenn had nice calves. This wasn't a battle. It was cultural absorption via mayonnaise-based side dishes. Glenn stood frozen, a horrified spectator. At one point, a toddler threw a balloon at him and shouted, "Funny bug man." He didn't flinch. His translator was fried, comms were jammed, and his boots had partially melted thanks to something labeled Sinjin lava wings. He sat down. That's when it happened. No one saw where the duck came from. One moment he was passively scanning radio chatter. The next, a tiny human child shoved a rubber duck into his hands, smiled like they knew something, and yelled, "You need him more than I do." The duck squeaked. Glenn stared. Something about that squeak echoed in his soul like a creaking door inside a brain that had long since hung a "Do not enter without protective sanity gear" sign. He looked around. Laughter, grease smoke, country music, sunblock, destiny, and someone nearby screamed, "Y'all, who wants to do shots off the UFO guy?" The sun dipped below the horizon in that unnecessarily cinematic way Earth had perfected without CGI. To Glenn, it looked like the sky itself was combusting. Honestly, that would have been less terrifying than what was unfolding. Corporal Nibs, now shirtless, belted out Sweet Home Alabama on a karaoke machine somehow powered by a beer can generator and raw human stubbornness. His backup dancer, Sergeant Jarnak, performed with full commitment. Hip thrusts, finger guns, the works. Meanwhile, Private Zurl, arguably the deadliest operative in the squad, had entered a jalapeno eating contest. She downed 6, refused water, and wore a look that said, "I can shatter your ribs, but first I must win this spicy duel of wills." 2 other operatives had discovered something called cornhole, a game involving beanbags and confusion. Glenn still had no idea what it meant, despite its name being alarmingly literal. Each time they missed the hole, a nearby human named Kenny would bellow, "Drink!" and the operatives, bound by confusion and social pressure, complied. Glenn made one last desperate attempt to assert control. "Squad! he barked, waving his arms in the universal military sign for stop celebrating and start panicking. No one acknowledged him. Specialist Vor merely offered him a sausage on a stick. It was incredible, which somehow made everything worse. "This is a reconnaissance mission," Glenn shouted, his voice distorted by a mouthful of tangy sauce. "We're supposed to be observing." "We are," Vor yelled back. "Look how they marinate." A small child ran past and squirted Glenn with a water gun filled with something sticky and red called Fruit Punch Blast Extreme. It smelled like artificial watermelon and existential dread. Glenn didn't react. He simply stood there, dripping, the duck still in his grasp. He had stopped trying to give it back. Every time he did, the child solemnly shook their head and whispered, "It chose you." Then, at exactly 8:47 p.m., reality unhinged. A human named Stacy declared it was time for the ultimate American Gladiator backyard showdown. Cars were rearranged into a makeshift arena. Glenn didn't understand the rules, but they involved pool noodles, inflatable dinosaur suits, and a trampoline someone had borrowed from a neighbor who may or may not have been conscious. Sergeant Janik was roped into the first match. They gave him a plastic sword, a bucket helmet, and told him, "Try not to cry this time." Glenn watched in silent horror as his elite, decorated soldier, top of his class, expert in silent infiltration, was launched off the trampoline by a man named Bubba yelling, "Freedom!" Midair, Janik landed in a kiddie pool filled with cheese balls. "Why are they like this?" Glenn muttered, somewhere between hysteria and anthropology. "What is the objective?" No answer, just more noise, more chaos, more beer-fueled interpretive dancing. And then came the moment that shattered all known logic. A gaggle of teenagers arrived, hauling what they claimed was the greatest invention in backyard science. A slip-and-slide duct-taped to a leaf blower, powered by something they described only as liquid courage. Against every ounce of judgment Glenn had left, which wasn't much, he watched it activate. One human screamed with delight as they launched across the yard, soared through a flaming hula hoop, landed in a trash can, and emerged holding a raccoon no one remembered owning. The crowd erupted. The raccoon appeared completely unfazed. Glenn sat down on a cooler. Someone handed him a s'more. He didn't question it. He took a bite. It was perfect. For one serene moment, he forgot everything, the council, the mission, the laws of physics, even his own reflection. Then someone yelled, "Taco Bell run! Who's coming?" Half the squad cheered. One operative screamed, "I'm driving!" They did not, in fact, know how to drive. They commandeered a lime green truck that blared "Baby Got Back" every time it turned left. Glenn didn't move. He sat there, a broken sentinel in a lawn chair apocalypse. The duck squeaked softly in his lap. He looked down at it and whispered, "What do you know that I don't?" The duck didn't answer, but somehow it felt like it had. By 9:32 p.m., the mission was officially unsalvageable. Private Zerl returned from the jalapeno eating contest, not victorious, but what analysts would later call victorious adjacent, having stared down the reigning champion and whispered, "Pain is the sound of progress." URL's tongue was glowing. No one asked why. Sergeant Janik, still dusted in cheese and mild regret, was now hoisted atop the shoulders of men in American flag tank tops, freshly anointed king of the cookout. His crown, a warm burger bun. His first royal decree was a heartfelt speech on interspecies unity, which included the immortal phrase, "And another thing, y'all got excellent pickles." Technician Drex had disappeared into a hammock, locked in a heated debate about cryptocurrency, with a man who believed the moon landing was fake, but had seen Bigfoot go live on TikTok. Behind the shed, Glenn crouched like a shadow with PTSD. His wrist interface spun simulation after simulation, each more disturbing than the last. Total cultural absorption. Scenarios where his squad vanished into suburbia forever. One ended with Sergeant Janik legally adopted by the Hendersons. There were no weapons, no hostile tech, no radiation zones. Just hot dogs, ambiguous music, and a gravitational field of hospitality strong enough to break chain of command. And then came the final blow. Bingo. It started quietly, Tables, cards, chips, hope. A woman named Barb sat beside him. Her voice carried the weight of black holes. Sit down, sugar. This round's for pie. Glen's body obeyed before his mind did. Then, B1. I-22. G-54. The numbers pulled at his soul like a tractor beam of chaos and carbs. Barb whispered, I just need 067. And Glen felt something ancient stir within him. The air, if you could call the fairy-lit porch air, grew dense, tense, practically humming. Then someone screamed, Bingo! And it all exploded. Accusations, swears, card inspections. A woman shouted, Cheater! I'll see you at church. Someone threw a folding chair and missed. It hit a tray of deviled eggs. Glen stood, duck in hand, and backed away like he was escaping a war crime. Behind the garage was worse. Karaoke had begun. Specialist Vor was on stage screaming, living on a prayer with the panicked energy of a man mid-exorcism. His translator lagged 3 seconds behind, causing a demonic echo that only made the crowd love him more. One man sobbed openly. Private Zerl was next. She chose Wrecking Ball, and meant it. Her performance left half the porch in ruins. Someone yelled, She's got feelings, damn it, as the fairy lights flickered in sympathy. Glen backed away, boots crunching over glow sticks, solo cups, and a croquet mallet that somehow smelled like regret. Then he ran into Dale. Dale wasn't a soldier, a scholar, or even particularly clean. But Dale had aura. The kind of guy who had once stared down an angry possum for dominion over a grill, and won. Y'all from up north? Dale asked, squinting with the weight of prophetic knowledge. Further, Glen answered. Dale nodded like a man who understood galactic trajectories and also taxidermy. You look like you've seen things. I have, Glen whispered. I've been to Memphis, Dale said. Same difference. They stood in silence. Dale lit a cigarette, offered one to Glen. Glen took it, didn't light it, just held it. It's the people, Dale said, gazing into the abyss like it owed him $20. You show up thinking we're dumb, and we are, but in a way that's real hard to walk away from. I've noticed, Glen murmured. Dale looked at the duck. That your emotional support poultry? I don't know anymore. That's fair. From somewhere nearby came a shout. There's a possum in the cooler again, followed by a cheer. Glen closed his eyes. He felt it, in his core, in his xenobones. The line had been crossed. The moment had passed. Extraction was no longer possible. Not because it was too late, but because no one wanted to leave. They had been claimed. They had belonged. He turned slowly. The inflatable dinosaur had returned. This time it brought friends. The night had reached critical absurdity. Time itself stopped behaving. And Glen knew, whether it was 11 p.m. or next Thursday was no longer clear. A fog machine hissed in the background. Someone had constructed a dance floor out of cardboard and broken dreams. The moon itself now pulsed in sync with Cotton Eye Joe. At 12:03 a.m., Sergeant Janik made a last-ditch effort to extract the squad. He clapped twice and yelled, Okay, everybody in the ship. The response, a conga line. He disappeared into it like a man devoured by the beat. Technician Drex had emotionally bonded with a lawn chair and was now giving life advice to a tiki torch. The torch flickered in solemn agreement whenever Drex made a particularly heartfelt point. Specialist Vor had gone full native. He now wore jorts, real jorts, not cleverly disguised ones. His translator, overwhelmed by dialects and dipped in moonshine, had defaulted to Southern enthusiasm mode. Glen stumbled toward the beacon he'd planted under the trampoline for emergency extraction. It was gone. In its place, a cooler filled with neon gelatin shots and a raccoon in sunglasses. The beacon hadn't been taken. It had joined. Panic overtook him. He initiated Protocol Dusk Shade 4, emergency fallback shelter in case of complete cultural collapse. Location, the nearest neutral zone. A Waffle House. He didn't walk. He limped, the duck tucked beneath his arm like a security blanket that might file a report later. The Waffle House glowed ahead like a fluorescent sanctuary of grease and salvation. Inside, the scent of fried food and poor decisions was thick enough to chew. Everyone stopped when he entered. A woman in a NASCAR jacket froze mid-syrup pour. A teenager in pajama pants glanced up from his pancakes like an oracle of chaos. A man with a tattoo of a flaming taco just said, "Huh!" Behind the counter, Dale. "You made it," he said, nodding with biblical calm. "I need answers," Glenn croaked, voice. Drex was slow dancing with the jukebox. The line hadn't just been crossed. It was doing backflips while waving a sparkler. Glenn stood. He activated the backup recall beacon, surgically implanted behind his left kidney for exactly this flavor of catastrophe. It beeped once. High above Earth, the orbiting extraction ship stirred. Protocol Shadow Fade 1. Abandon mission. Retrieve surviving asset. A beam of light tore through the roof of the Waffle House. Glenn ascended. The duck came with him. No one else did. They had chosen the madness. They had stayed. "Y'all come back any time," someone shouted. Back on the ship, Glenn collapsed to his knees. Covered in glitter, drenched in maple syrup, steeped in soul-altering compromise. He dropped the duck, squeaked, and for the first time in hours he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a diplomatic wheeze, a full, helpless, primal laugh. Then he went still, eyes wide, mouth silent. A man who had faced the one thing no training could prepare him for. America. The silence aboard the extraction vessel wasn't just silence. It was a decision. Even the walls seemed to avoid eye contact. The automated systems dimmed the lights to something between gentle night mode and emotional shutdown. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and quiet despair. Glenn didn't move. The med drone hovered nearby, uncertain whether to offer painkillers, therapy, or perhaps a biscuit. He declined all three. They ran every protocol. Decontamination, psychological recovery, vital scan. He passed them all. No injuries, no foreign agents, except for a lingering scent of charred meat, aerosol cheese, and something deeper, existential barbecue. The duck, still with him. It passed through every scan, security field, and threat analysis without setting off a single alarm. One junior technician tried to confiscate it. He immediately burst into tears. No one else tried. At command, the big chairs gathered. Generals, analysts, council members, the kind of people whose default expression is mild panic in a tuxedo. The logs were reviewed, the footage dissected, the recovery reports triple-checked. No signs of battle, no resistance, no trauma, just exposure. In the interrogation cube, aggressively lit, acoustically perfect, morally bleak, Glenn sat. So did the duck. "Sergeant," said Chief Analyst Dreb, voice low and cautious. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Glenn blinked once. "What happened on the surface?" "Nothing." "Where's the rest of your squad?" Silence. "Are they alive?" Flinch. No answer. The duck squeaked. "On its own." Dreb recoiled. "This is a formal debriefing, Sergeant." Still nothing. Dr. Halen, lead psycholinguist, tried a softer tone. "Were you harmed?" Glenn gently reached forward and turned the duck to face the wall. "I see," said Dr. Halen. She did not. They tried everything. Logic, empathy, threats. One bold soul even attempted interpretive dance. Nothing worked. Every time Glenn opened his mouth, they leaned forward, only for him to exhale. Eventually, they gave up. Officially recovered, but uncooperative. File sealed. Earth reclassified as high-risk psychological hazard. Zero contact recommended. Unofficially, rumors exploded. Some said Glenn had joined a cult. Others believed the duck was a divine artifact from an ancient mall-based religion. One theory claimed he was trapped in a reality show and came back with secondhand embarrassment trauma. Glenn was left alone. Private quarters. No duties. No karaoke machines, per his explicit request. He spent hours staring into space. Not dramatically, just tired. Like someone trying to forget the feeling of salsa dancing with a grandmother while a crowd chanted, Chug, chug, chug. One day, a junior officer knocked. "Sergeant," they said, nervous. "I read your log. Can I ask one thing?" Glenn looked up. Just one piece of advice. About Earth. About humans. A long pause. Then he spoke. "Pack snacks." The officer blinked. "That's it." Glenn nodded, then added, "And never accept a challenge from someone named Big Dave." The officer started to laugh, then stopped, because Glenn wasn't laughing, and neither was the duck. The file was buried. Earth labeled culturally hazardous. Yellow flagged. Approach only with a death wish or a deeply ironic sense of humor. Life went on. New threats emerged. Wormhole tax disputes. Plasma embargoes. A species on Nebula 12 that found religion through synchronized swimming. But Glenn remained. His wing of the Strategic Recovery Division stayed quiet. His room had no sharp edges, no questions, and, mercifully, no cake disguised as furniture. No one visited. Not out of fear, but because anyone who stayed too long walked away humming jingles from sitcoms they'd never seen, and craving funnel cake. The duck became legend. It was placed in a transparent stasis case. Preserved, studied, feared. Interns dared each other to press the button. One did, squeaked, or quit. One relocated to a silent moon with no atmosphere. Then weeks later it happened. A signal. From Earth. Not a weapon. Not a warning. A broadcast. Crackly. Distorted. Analog. A remix of Achy Breaky Heart. Whale sounds. And, undeniably, a kazoo solo. Command ignored it. Of course they did. But Glenn didn't. He stood in his doorway, listened, then whispered, "They're evolving." He requested full access. Denied. Asked again. Still denied. So he broke in. With a spoon. Security footage showed him dismantling a reinforced door using cutlery and sheer will. Took 7 minutes. A guard handed him a coffee and said, "Godspeed." He downloaded the transmissions. Watched them all. Hours upon hours of what humans call content. A man reviewing 17 kinds of ranch dressing. 2 women arguing if a haunted toaster had voting rights. A game show where contestants guessed if objects were cake. And then he laughed. Not a broken laugh. A wheezing, snorting, glorious collapse of sanity. Somewhere, a general dropped their tablet. Later that night, an officer knocked. "Sir, are you okay?" Glenn stared into the void. "They're not dangerous," he said. "They're insidious." The council convened. "They've surpassed chaos," Glenn warned. "They've gone post-irony. They've weaponized confusion." He placed a data chip on the table. Raw footage. No filters. No context. Just humanity. No one moved. "May the stars help you," he said, then walked out, the duck under one arm. He didn't look back. The room stayed silent. Finally, the youngest council member whispered, "Should we retaliate?" "No," said the chair, watching the duck's reflection in the polished table. "We should pray they never leave that planet." But it was already too late. A week later, a freighter in the Dvian sector picked up a hitchhiker. Human. Flip-flops. Asked if there was a karaoke bar nearby. Glenn had been right. They had already begun.